Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm very excited for because I'm going to be doing a reading wrap-up. To be honest, this maybe is the biggest reading wrap-up I've ever done on my channel. I have 14 books to chat through today. I have no idea how this happened, but honestly I'm pretty jazzed about it. So honestly, without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in. The first two books I'm going to chat about are actually part of the same series, and that is Persepolis Rising and Tiamats Wrath by James S.A. Corey. These are books 7 and 8 within the Expanse series, and I'm happy to say I am almost done with this series with only one book left. And I'm also really happy to say that this final sequence, these last 3 books that I would definitely sort of put in their own category relative to the entire series, has been so good. It's had me on the edge of my seat. I also feel like there were some plot changes and character evolutions I wasn't necessarily anticipating that I really feel like brought this whole series to another level. Obviously, the Expanse series is a series I've talked about so much on my channel. It is a very plot-forward space opera series set in the near future, with humanity having left the bounds of Earth, and now there are governments and human civilizations on Earth, Mars, the Moon, and a series of space stations called the Belt at the very beginning of book 1, which, as you can imagine, is a long time ago relative to where I'm now at in this series. We're introduced to one of our main characters, James Holden, and he's a ship captain, and he basically stumbles upon a piece of ancient alien technology which sort of upends everything within this space system. There was already a lot of tension between all of these different interplanetary governments. There's also a lot of exploitation and injustice that also exists within the galaxy itself, and this piece of alien technology sort of acts as the spark to create tension and outright war within and between all of these different planets. I cannot understate like how much happens throughout the course of this entire series. It's honestly so exciting, and the authors are able to balance sort of the macro and micro so well. We have these intimate character moments. You really follow a cast of characters you're going to fall in love with. Their found family component really roots the story so well, but we're also constantly introduced to new characters that expand and add to the story overall. We also get the opportunity to visit so many different places, planets, space stations, and everything becomes connected in this larger web of this story, and everything just grows on itself so wonderfully. It's intense, it's unputdownable, and again, I'm very much in the home stretch of this series. Having read books 7 and 8, I was really curious to see how I was going to feel going into this, because if you're familiar with this series, there's kind of a pivot that occurs in the back half of this series, but I'm so happy to report I'm really liking the direction. I found that it allowed characters to sort of exist in some unexpected places, growing their overall character journey, and I actually felt more connected to the characters in this sequence than I have in all of the previous books, which I personally really enjoyed. I just don't know how these authors keep this series so fresh, but you know, we're here. I'm loving it. I'm still loving it. So entertaining. Honestly, I would give both of these books 5 stars. I was hooked with these 2 installments, and I really cannot wait to read the 9th and final installment in this series, which I do plan to do quite soon. The next book I read was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. This is the second book to the Red Rising series, and a very, very, very popular series at that. I would say probably one of the most popular sci-fi series that's currently releasing. I personally had some unclear expectations going into this. I really did not enjoy Red Rising for a variety of reasons, spanning from the writing style, the characterization, just the overall plot setup, but I heard a lot of really good things about Golden Sun in particular, about how things really grew in terms of all of these areas I previously disliked. And I would agree generally. I do feel like Golden Sun is a stronger novel than Red Rising, but I still honestly would give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. But to take a step back, this is the second book to a sci-fi dystopian-esque series. We follow our main character Darrow, who is a Red. He lives in a very stratified world in which everyone's sort of organized by colors, and these colors are also associated with specific jobs. As a Red, he's at the very bottom of this hierarchy, forced to toil and do incredibly difficult labor, and he's also lied to consistently by the higher up colors. At the beginning of book 1, a variety of events occur, kind of resulting in Darrow getting involved in revolution, and he transforms himself in a gold, basically hiding amongst his enemies, and he is determined to sort of tear down this society from the inside out. Something about book 2 that I did really appreciate is that Pierce Brown definitely shifted the direction of the plot and story of this series with book 2. He left behind some of the weaker elements that occurred plot-wise in book 1 and kind of recalibrated where he wanted to go. It was definitely much more sci-fi focused and much broader in scale in terms of the level of conflict, which in general I appreciated. I will say I continue to still have issues with, one, the characterization. I find Darrow as a main character to just not be very rootable for this story. He's just kind of boring to me, and he's so good to the point where he just feels constantly shrouded with plot armor. Next thing I feel like is both a plus and a minus. The plot is incredibly fast-paced, which makes it a very quick and easy read, and at times like very, very engaging. But at the same time, because there's so much plot, so many plot twists, some of them land, some of them don't, and I also feel like things happen so quickly, the weight of these moments are sometimes lost to me as a reader. And just in general, I feel like the scope of this world really hasn't been fully founded. The scope of the conflict, like the goal of this revolution, we're really focused on Darrow and his friends, which is fine, but I also feel like the story is trying to sell that this is a massive revolution, but I just don't feel like we're actually seeing all sides of this revolution as it's taking place, and we're just kind of being told things are happening. So yes, on the one hand, this book was entertaining, it was very plot forward, there was lots of twists and turns, some of them I guess, some of them I didn't, but just in general, there's a lot more I wish that this book delivered on, especially given the hype that it has within the community, personally speaking. So yeah, I'd probably give this book like a 3 out of 5 stars. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue on. I hear the next trilogy is much better and much more expansive, but I just really like don't have a lot of emotional stakes towards the characters and the story, and so it's like I just don't feel super drawn to keep going, you know? Next up, I went down a little bit of a contemporary summer romance rabbit hole. I went on a beach vacation. I read a lot of romance, and I'm not gonna lie, it was honestly so much fun. When I'm in the mood for romance and I'm able to find an author and it hits, it's just like a delight, and I power through these books so quickly and I can't put them down. They acted as such a good like mid-year palate cleanser, and I feel very refreshed and ready to take on some more intense fantasy reads in the second half of the year. But basically, I read a lot of Abby Jimenez. I read the 3 books released in the Part of Your World romance series. All of these books do that classic romance thing where it centers unique main characters in each of the installments, but there are different threads that sort of connect the characters in this sort of romantic universe, if you will. The first book I completed was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, the first book. In this, we're following kind of like a medical heiress, if you will, and a small town bed and breakfast owner. They come unexpectedly crashing into each other's lives, and even though they're from 2 different worlds, they very quickly form feelings for each other and sort of begin to love and grow and appreciate one another. Something about Abby Jimenez's book specifically that I really enjoy is that it's very much about the romance, but it's also very much about the individual, like emotional journeys each character has to go on and how these characters can support each other. But inevitably, every character sort of needs to have their own aha moment before they can like really move on to the next chapter of their life. Specifically for our female main character, she struggles with having just left an abusive relationship and her parents' expectations, which are very, very intense. So this is a story where she kind of is learning how to like stand up and choose herself first, and it's quite beautiful. I liked this book. I didn't love this book. I enjoyed the chemistry between the 2 characters. I did feel like the from 2 different worlds storyline aspect of this book just wasn't my favorite type of trope, but I still would recommend, and I gave this book like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. However, the next 2 books within this series I adored. With book 2 being Yours Truly, this centers again some side characters that we have run into, and we're following our main character Brianna, who is an ER doctor, and she is unhappy at the beginning of the story because a new doctor has joined her team and they got off right away on the wrong foot. However, though, they also begin writing letters to each other back and forth, and through these letters they get to know each other much more. This is a book that has so much incredible angst. It definitely has some miscommunication, but I feel like it is handled beautifully, and it also has letter writing, which I feel like is so romantic and a classic kind of rivals to lovers situation. It's so sweet, and if you love like a soft anxious boy, this is definitely the book for you. I think this is my favorite of the 3 books so far, but I go back and forth between this one and the third one because I loved them both so much. I honestly would give this like 5 stars, 4.5 stars. It was so entertaining. And then the last book that I read by Abby Jimenez is Just for the Summer. This again was just so emotional, having such wonderful individual character storylines that just felt so lovely to see them sort of begin to work through various traumas, family realities in such a way that just felt so healing, and seeing 2 people that just care so deeply for one another get to know each other. But also the setup and synopsis of this one is quite playful. We follow Emma and Justin, and they basically both have the same curse, which is after you date either of them and then you break up, you inevitably find the love of your life, meaning that Emma and Justin are sort of struggling to find their person. They decide decide though to break the curse by cheating a bit by dating each other, then breaking up, and then of course they'll each find the love of their life. This is set in the summer. It has some really lovely friendship dynamics, some really complex family dynamics in here as well. It also has so many Easter eggs from the previous books that I personally found to be very delightful. I would highly recommend reading these books that I just showed off in order if you're interested in reading them, but I also loved this and I would give it like a 4.55 stars. So entertaining. So after reading all that contemporary romance, I felt well prepared to pick up some very intense sci-fi and fantasy. The next book I was able to complete was The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second standalone novel that exists between his two trilogies. All of these books are set in the same world, and I loved this book so much. This might be my favorite Joe Abercrombie book to date. Not only did it have his really fantastic character writing, his gruesome plot lines, and his sort of grim, dark setting that just completely catches you by surprise over and over again, the structure and just like writing of this book was just so unique and interesting. I was drawn in immediately and could not put it down. The concept of The Heroes is we're basically on the eve of this big battle that's occurring near this hill called The Heroes. We're reading from a huge cast of characters, like a huge cast, and basically reading and following people who exist not only on both sides of the conflict, but also exist at different power levels on both sides of the conflict. It just creates such a unique sort of tapestry of experience. We're constantly weaving in and out of different perspectives, jumping from one character to the next as they cross paths, allowing us to not only have this level of intensity and anticipation as this battle creeps forward or as we experience different scrimmages, but it was also just so unbelievably immersive. And then as a reader, you felt committed to both sides for different reasons, upping the intensity and the harrowing nature of the bloodshed that was taking place. This book basically follows a battle between a northern army and an invading southern army. Politically speaking, it's very relevant to the overall universe that Joe Abercrombie has created. The cool thing though is I actually feel like we encountered a lot of new characters within this series, or very, very limited side characters that are now getting like a bigger stage. But again, even though we had some main characters that existed throughout the course of this story, there were some characters we only maybe met a few or one time throughout the course of the book, but those chapters still were significant and emotional and interesting. Joe Abercrombie himself also has just such a talent for writing military strategy. It was so interesting to see the different types of battles that occurred over the course of this novel, but also how he was able to capture sort of the randomness and the chaos of battle too. And something else to kind of go alongside the structure and writing style, there were scenes that kind of felt like a one-shot movie. We were constantly kind of weaving in and out of these battle scenes, jumping from character to character. And just from a pure structure point of view, it was so cool and so effective in terms of creating these moments within the plot. Overall, I would also say the characters were more likable in this standalone than I feel like sometimes we typically find within his novels. That being said though, don't get me wrong, you're going to be running into some characters you will despise, or they're so dumb and frustrating, which is obviously endangering lives of everyone around them. All in all, this was just a fantastic fantasy standalone. It was so impactful, by far one of my favorite books I've read this year. Again, I think my favorite Joe Abercrombie book. It was just so interesting. I was hooked. And the fact that this book takes place over the course of 3 days is wild. Like, you feel so rooted in these storylines. It feels like it could have been months. And yeah, it was like a quagmire of an experience. It was so good. I would give this 5 out of 5 stars. Another book I picked up this month that I absolutely loved was The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. I got this as a recommendation from one of my favorite booktubers, which is Elliot. I'll have her channel linked down below. She raves about this book series constantly, and I finally read it, and wow, did I love it. This is such a unique book. It houses some of my favorite like classic fantasy tropes, but it really adds so many different fantasy inputs that you feel like should not work together, but somehow they do. This is a quest-centered story kind of following an unlikely crew setting out together to kind of answer some specific questions, but then inevitably getting wrapped up in like a larger political conspiracy. We follow who is essentially a very hot vampire, a runaway witch, and like an anthropologist as they work alongside each other, and they're basically trying to unlock the secrets of this past enemy who is now long since dead, who very much gives like alien vibes. It's like very hive mind core, you know what I mean? But as they begin to sort of try to unlock these secrets, the possibility that this enemy could actually be returning begins to rise, and we actually read from not only these characters' point of views, but some other characters too. There's so many different types of abilities. I mean, again, we have a vampire, a witch, we have magical components, there's even steampunk components. There's so many different things at play within this book, and it was delightful. There's found family, great humor, lovable characters, a really riveting plot. I was just like, I honestly had no idea where this book was going to take me. I had no idea what to even anticipate from the world, but I just appreciated everything so much, and I flew through it, and I can't wait to read book 2. Book 1, great. Highly recommend. 4.5, 5 stars. Next up is a stretch of books I either didn't like at all or just found to be okay. And unfortunately, some of them are very, very popular. So let's get through some of these hyped reads that let me down. The first is The Heartless Hunter. This is a witch begins to date witch hunter to provide her more cover, sort of setup and story like enemies to lovers situation. It's set in a post-revolution world, maybe like French Revolution, Russian Revolution vibes. We follow our main character who during the day basically plays that she is a dumb, rich, noble girl, but at night she acts as the Crimson Moth, helping to ferry witches to safety. Because with the revolution, the government was basically overthrown, a government of witches, and now all magic is outlawed. However, though, she fears that her cover might be breaking, so to strengthen it, she decides to like date this well-known witch hunter, and he decides to court her because he's trying to find the Crimson Moth. This book is just okay. I think the ideas are fun, and I feel like there was something there that could have been a bit more entertaining. Overall, it's just kind of underwhelmed by the writing style. The plotting really is quite flimsy. Strength was definitely in the two main characters, and I will say the dramatic irony that existed between the two main characters where they're both dating each other for their own reasons but kind of having guilty feelings because they're falling for the other person was fun to read. But I will say, like, the overall motivations of our characters were not necessarily clear. There also just like wasn't a lot of world building or setup for this Crimson Moth character, and the side characters in particular were acting in wild ways that I just can't excuse, if you know what I mean. It was just fine. It was honestly maybe kind of bad, actually, worse than fine. And I wouldn't recommend this book if I'm being honest, but it's super popular. I wanted to like it. I'd give it like a 2.5. Another book that I just did not like at all was A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle Jensen. This is a romantasy story that's inspired by Norse mythology, and honestly, the first 50% of this book I loved. We follow our main character who lives in a world where you have a drop of blood from the gods. It kind of grants you magical abilities, and you also become very politically important. At the beginning of the story, our main character is in a marriage she is not happy in, and due to a variety of reasons, she also catches the eye of a powerful lord in the area, and he decides to use her as a political pawn against her will, putting her in a very precarious situation where she doesn't really have anyone that she can rely on or trust. She's also especially in a precarious situation as she begins to form feelings for the lord's son. And this creates a lot of, complicated situations for the both of them. Honestly, again, as I said, the first 50% was good. I really liked the main character. She was strong. She was interesting. The political aspects of this book were also intriguing. I liked the Norse mythology influence. I liked the back and forth between the two characters. I liked the writing style. It was honestly a very strong writing style. Like, the stylization of the story, I felt like really worked and matched the Norse influence of this book and story. But like halfway through, everything fell off a cliff. I felt like nothing made sense. The plot went absolutely awry. Like, everything that was relevant in the first half no longer was, in a way that it just like was fully focused on steamy scenes. I just felt like the balance between character interactions and plot just no longer made sense, and I just really was so disappointed by this because of how much I was appreciating the first half of this book. But yeah, I really hated the second half. I'd give this like 2 stars. Disappointing. Another book that I was a little let down by, but not quite as much as the previous 2 books I just showed off, was Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This is the second book to a trilogy, the first one being Godkiller. I really, really enjoyed Godkiller. This is a fantasy series that's set in a very interesting world. Basically, this was a land that once had many, many gods. Some were very powerful, some were very minor, but essentially there could be gods of so many different things, from a river to the sea to the sun. And it was very common that the everyday person would be praying to a variety of gods for favor, for help, all these types of things. However, though, before the start of the first book, there was a revolution that sort of overthrew the rule of gods, as there were some very powerful gods that were very hard on humanity, and now any worship of gods is completely outlawed. In book 1, we're basically introduced to a cast of characters. The first is a young girl who has the god of lies in her pocket. The next is a god killer, which this young girl basically hires to bring her and her pocket god to a place where they can find him a shrine. And then lastly, a lost knight who used to fight under the banner of the king. Strength of Godkiller, in my opinion, was the found family component. I loved seeing these unlikely characters not only work alongside each other but form a connection. There was so much humor and love there, and sort of these characters I felt like were the shining part of the story, and especially the relationships they formed with each other. The writing style was also strong, and in general I found the lore in the world to also be interesting. Book 2 I do feel like was a little bit of a slump relative to book 1. I think because first and foremost that found family component just really wasn't there, and I think it was sacrificed to allow different plot storylines to unfurl alongside each other at the same time. And while I understand from a plot point of view why it was done, I just feel like it kind of brought the level of the story down a bit and just made me care less, and there just wasn't enough like humor and interaction and heart that I feel like was present within book 1. I do feel like there was some world building which I appreciated into book 2, but I also feel like the pacing in the middle was a little bit off, and just in general it just wasn't as strong of a showing as book 1 was, which I gave like 4 stars. In general, I do plan to still continue on with this trilogy, but I would probably give the second book 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was When We Were Innocent, which I read for my IRL book club. This was sort of a fun one to check out, because I would say I don't typically read a lot of summer thrillers, so this was kind of out of my usual genre comfort zone. And I would say overall, our book club kind of had the same sentiments about this book, and that it was just okay. Basically, this is a story where 10 years prior to present day in this novel, 3 best friends go on a vacation in Greece, and one of them passes away. This results in sort of a media storm that surrounds the 2 surviving girls, and everyone sort of has theories on what happened. They must have done it, these types of things. Fast forward 10 years, one of the girls sort of lives a reclusive existence, totally pulling herself away from the public eye, and the other girl sort of has transformed this situation into her own power, becoming a really prevalent public speaker. They have not really seen or spoken to each other since, until one day one of the girls shows up on the other girl's doorstep asking for an alibi, and suddenly it sort of feels like history is repeating itself. Throughout the course of the story, we're jumping from past and present, following our present day storyline as our main character kind of begins to not only unpack the past, but deal with the present reality of being sort of in the media attention once again for a high profile case, and also existing around this person she hasn't seen in a long time, the intensity of those emotions, and also kind of adding a layer of being an unreliable narrator. I will say the strength of this book is that there is this simmering tension throughout the course of it. It's a very quick read. My favorite aspects of the book were reading the chapters from the past, the sort of toxic friendship of youth that existed between these 3 girls. I appreciated that, and I actually wish there was more of that. Overall though, given that this is sort of a thriller story, the ending was a little lackluster. I feel like there was a lot of buildup, a lot of tension for an ending that sort of like left me scratching my head like, that's how it's gonna end. And while I do feel like the beginning was interesting and strong, it did just sort of fizzle out in a way that I feel like I don't know if I would really say I loved this book or would recommend this book. It wasn't bad though, like the writing style was engaging, the story was engaging. So again, I'd probably give it like a 3 stars. Like, not great, not amazing, not bad, but just like good, you know? Next book I completed is the Stardust Grail by Yumi Kitasai. I loved Yumi Kitasai's The Deep Sky. I read it earlier this year, so I was so excited to pick up her new release, which is kind of being billed as Indiana Jones in space. We follow our main character Maya, who used to be like a very talented thief. She would travel the galaxy with her close friend Uncle, and they would basically steal artifacts and return them to the civilizations that they were stolen from. Maya though has left this life of hers behind, and she's now completing her PhD on Earth until some information is founded pointing to the existence of a lost artifact that her and Uncle have been trying to find for years. So she decides to sort of take on one final job and venture back out into the world. This book I feel like again had some strengths and had some weaknesses. I think the overall setup, this sort of thief in space collecting all these different artifacts, and also like the anthropological academic feel of the story was fun. I like that this book was rooted in academia. I like that there was a focus on how Maya felt about herself, not only moving through space, moving through this profession of hers, but also there was a large conversation around identity, colonization, not only as it relates to these artifacts, but also how Maya feels like she fits within the universe, the relationship she has formed with intergalactic species, how she feels about humanity and humans, and how all of these relationships can be rather complicated. I liked that element quite a bit. I feel like the found family component between Maya and Uncle was incredibly believable. Where this story sort of fell a bit more flat for me me was I do feel like the author was trying to expand this found family to include some additional side characters, but there just wasn't enough time, in my opinion, given to those relationships to feel as believable as I feel like the author wanted us to. I also feel like there was a lot of repetitive plot action. We sort of just went from point A to point B to point C to point D, and like the same types of things sort of happened over and over again. Entertaining, sure, but I would say also a little bit repetitive. The ending and kind of the major plot movement was also like a little wild. So I feel like there was some great strengths to this, a wonderful writing style, and a really great main character, which I was expecting from this author. But I would say from a plot point of view, it just wasn't as tight as I was expecting, especially given how much I loved The Deep Sky. But the strengths of this author's writing were still there, and I for sure will be reading other books by this author in the future, but this one just wasn't my favorite, you know, and I'd give it like a 3.25 out of 5 stars. Alrighty, and the last book I was able to complete for this wrap up, luckily, was one I really enjoyed. As you can see, I had some highs and lows over the course of this reading period, and that book is Binti. I was able to read the first short story of this trilogy, and I definitely plan to wrap up this trilogy soon because I loved book 1 so much. This is a coming of age, very intense, like sci-fi story. In it, we're introduced to our main character, Binti, and Binti is a very talented, very smart young girl. She is especially skilled in mathematics and also something called the astrolabe. At the beginning of the story, she receives an invitation to attend this like intergalactic university, and she's very excited to go. However, though, her people in her village typically never leave, and to make the decision to leave could actually result in her being ostracized from her community at large, which is obviously something to weigh deeply. But Binti's desire to pursue knowledge and also connect with other beings who are just as excited about these topics as she is pushes her to leave home. However, though, in transit to this university, her spaceship is actually attacked by an alien group, kind of upending everything in Binti's life. This book was so good. It also had so many different inputs that worked so well. At the core of the story, this is a coming of age story. We're following Binti as she's pursuing her dream, traveling to a new place far away from home, making friends, taking on different trials and tribulations, and also kind of confronting her feelings on herself, her own culture, and where she feels like she fits in, not only within the community in which she's from, but now this larger tapestry of like human and alien existence. And it's honestly so beautiful to see. But that's also paired with a very intense sci-fi plot. And the thing about this author's writing, which is just bananas, is the amount that she's able to fit in not a lot of space. Book 1 is like 100 pages, and like all of the character work, the character building, the plot building was so well constructed that the author didn't need a lot of space to like realistically and very clearly describe and create the world that she wanted, which really shows that like you really don't necessarily need a lot of space to make something believable. You just have to do it well. Sometimes you need more space to do it well, but not this author. She doesn't, because she's just so dang good at everything that she writes. I love Binti so much. I'm so excited to see what she gets up to next. I love this sort of university setting. I also just really appreciated the additional variables that existed within this book. Book 1 was amazing, and I have a feeling the rest of the trilogy is going to be amazing too. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Alrighty guys, that is my 14 book reading wrap up. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!